So if we move on now, minutes of the last meeting. They've been on the table for at least half an hour. Is that your wish that I should sign them? Thank you very much. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman, we've received apologies for absence from councillors Peter Isherwood, Brian Ellis, David Else, Nicholas Holder, John Williamson, Stuart Stennett, Jeanette Stennett, Christian Hesser and Mary Forozeski. Councillor Bob Upton is in attendance as a substitute.
Thank you very much. And declarations of interest?
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Any questions from members of the public?
Has anybody else got?
So any members got any declarations of interest? Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the public?
Yeah, no questions from the public received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, we have an application before us. It's WA 2015-1935 at Little Acres Nursery, St George's Road, Farnham, GU9 9NT. This is an outline application with all matters reserved for the erection of up to 80 dwellings, including affordable, and a building to provide commercial or retail use following demolition of the existing buildings. And this is a revision of WA 2015-1057, and as amended by plans received on the 28th of the 6th 2016, and a transport assessment received 24th of the 3rd 2016, and as amplified by ecology report received 25th of the 7th 2016. So officers, would you like to do the presentation? Louise, you're going first, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. There are a few changes of principle that members need to be aware of since the last application for outline planning permission on a greenfield site was presented to the Joint Planning Committee. Firstly, the Council's draft local plan has been published for consultation, and it's considered that members should give the policies in the draft local plan significant weight. The Farnham Neighbourhood Plan has been submitted to the Council and is also currently out for consultation. This should also be afforded some weight. The starting point for the proposal is, however, still the Council's 2002 local plan, which is the most up-to-date adopted development plan. On the back of the site allocations in the draft local plan, the Council now consider that it can demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing. This means that the Council can give substantial weight to policies which seek to restrict the supply of housing. This includes policy C2, which seeks to control development in the countryside away from existing settlements. Members should, however, note that they should not give full weight to this policy, as it is not entirely consistent with the NPPF. This is because the NPPF refers to the protection of the countryside for its intrinsic character and beauty, but policy C2 seeks to protect the countryside for its own sake. Members should therefore consider this proposal in relation to its impact on the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. Members should be aware that the site is not allocated in the draft local plan, as the draft local plan only includes site allocations for sites capable of accommodating in excess of 100 units. It is, however, an allocated site in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, and this adds weight to the support for the proposal. Members are further advised that this current application is an outline application with all matters reserved. This evening, therefore, members are being asked to determine the principle of delivering up to 80 dwellings and a commercial or retail use on the site, and matters with regards to site access, layout, scale and appearance are all reserved matters which should only be considered at reserved matters stage. Thank you, and Rebecca will now present the proposal.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site can be seen outlined in red on the screen. The site is located to the west of St George's Road and to the east of Badshot Lee Road. The developed area of Badshot Lee is located to the north of the application site. Separating the application site from that of the developed area is a recreation ground to the north of the site. Alongside this area is an open field which is outlined in black on the screen. This land benefits from outline planning permission for the erection of 71 residential dwellings, and a reserved matters application is currently being assessed by the Council. The aerial image on the screen shows the immediate surrounding area in relation to the application site. The developed area of Badshot Lee can be seen to the north and northwest of the site. Squires Garden Centre can be seen to the southwest, with Badshot Farm nurseries and Badshot Farm to the south. The land to the immediate east of the application site forms part of a residential property. A public footpath runs along the northern boundary of the site. The site itself measures 3.2 hectares. A vertical strip of land, which is under separate land ownership, is excluded from the application site. This land comprises the strip of vegetation seen on the screen, which I'll point out now. As such, the application site is essentially split into two areas, the eastern and the western. Access to the site is currently achieved via St George's Road. The eastern part of the site comprises a plant nursery. There are a number of glass houses, polytunnels and outbuildings in this area associated with this use. However, the plant nursery itself does not appear to be in active use at present. In addition to the plant nursery buildings, a small cafe and residential dwelling known as Little Acres are located in this area of the site. The western part of the site largely comprises open fields with buildings in poor state of repair to the very west. The most western area of the site is currently used for the grazing of horses associated with the Ray of Hope Animal Sanctuary. Turning now to some site photographs. The photographs on screen show the existing eastern area of the application site. An existing cafe, Poppy's Tea Rooms, can be seen in the top left, and the existing residential bungalow on site, which is located behind the cafe, can be seen in the top right. The plant nursery buildings can be seen in the bottom photograph. The open fields comprising the western area of the application site can be seen in the following photographs on screen. The top two photographs are taken from the public footpath looking into the site. The fields to the far west area are currently in use by the Ray of Hope Animal Sanctuary, are seen in the bottom photograph. The following photographs show the recreation ground, which is located adjacent to the application site to the north. The bottom photograph is taken from within the recreation ground, looking south towards the application site. The existing glass houses associated with the plant nursery can be seen in the background. As previously mentioned, a public footpath, footpath 112, runs along the northern boundary of the application site. This footpath can be seen in the photographs on screen. When standing at the midpoint of the application site, at the top of the strip of land excluded from the site, when looking to the west, this will be the view that you get, and looking east can be seen in the top right. Neighbouring properties located in Beechtree Drive can be seen in the bottom photograph with the footpath to the left. Squires Garden Centre is located to the southwest of the application site. Vehicle access to this adjacent area can be seen in the photographs on screen. The western boundary of the application site can be seen in the top photographs. The following slide shows the existing access to the site of St George's Road. The proposal is for outline planning permission for the erection of 80 residential dwellings together with a commercial retail building, with all matters reserved. In line with statutory requirements, however, vehicle access points to the site have been indicated on the submitted illustrative layout plan. Whilst access is a reserved matter, the indicative plan, as shown on the screen, sets out that access points to the site would be provided from both Badshot Leave Road to the west and St George's Road to the east. The County Highway Authority is satisfied that appropriate vehicular access for the entire scheme can be provided from St George's Road. However, the County Highway Authority is not satisfied that the proposed access on the western boundary of the site onto Badshot Lee Road could be delivered by the applicant. This is due to the fact that third-party land would be required to provide this access point. This land is outside of the applicant's control and it is not classified as public highway. Furthermore, on the basis of the information submitted as part of the application, the County Highway Authority is not satisfied that the proposed access would accord with relevant highway safety and technical design requirements. Notwithstanding this, officers are satisfied that appropriate access could be achieved for the entire scheme at reserve matter stage. through the provision of vehicular access from St George's Road and pedestrian and cycle access from Badshot Lee Road, St George's Road and through the recreation ground. The overall development would have a density of 25 dwellings per hectare. Although layout is a reserved matter, the indicative layout plan suggests that the western site area would feature a higher density of residential development than the eastern area. The indicative plan sets out that a commercial retail building with a floor space of 225 square metres would be located in the eastern area of the site, along with a communal play park area. Of the 80 proposed residential units, 48 are set to be market housing and 32 affordable housing units. The amount and mix of parking, along with the design of the proposed dwellings, would be matters to assess at the reserved matter stage. However, the indicative plan identifies a number of different building types with associated parking provision for affordable and market units. Officers consider the site to be in a sustainable location close to the amenities of Badshot Lee and Farnham. Although outside of the developed area, the proposal would be seen in the context of existing developed area, and it is considered that the proposal would not materially harm the intrinsic character, openness and beauty of the countryside. The proposal would provide a housing mix in line with the needs of the borough, and it would include a 40% affordable housing provision. The proposed sustainable drainage system measures comprise swales, wetland area, oversized pipes and 3 areas of porous pavings. Hydro breaks are proposed to maintain a restricted flow. Officers are satisfied that the proposed sustainable drainage system would not increase flood risk elsewhere, as storm water discharge rates would be limited to existing mean greenfield runoff rate. Infrastructure contribution would be secured as part of the proposal towards recycling, education, play and pitches and changing rooms, play area, highways improvements, public footpath improvements and a cycle scheme. Furthermore, contributions would be secured towards the Thames Basin Heath SPA avoidance strategy. The determining issues, therefore, are set out on the screen. Matters of principal and technical opinion are the principle of development, prematurity, loss of existing land uses, housing land supply, housing mix and affordable housing, highway considerations, infrastructure, flood risk, drainage and environmental considerations, impact on trees, archaeological considerations, air quality and land contamination impacts, and the effect on the SPA. The matters of judgment are the impact on the countryside beyond the greenbelt, impact on strategic gap, visual amenity, and residential amenity. Overall, officers are satisfied that the benefits of the proposal would outweigh the harm. If I could draw members' attention to the update sheet, you will see that there is a further update to provide. One further letter of representation has been received raising an objection to the proposal. It is considered, however, that the points raised have been addressed in the agenda report. An amendment is proposed to condition 1 to include access as a reserved matter. A further amendment is proposed to condition 3 to remove the first plan number, which is the indicative plan. And an additional condition is proposed. This would be as follows. The proposed commercial retail building shall not be used other than for the purposes of classes A1, A2, A3, A4, A5 and B1 as defined in the schedule to the Town and Country Planning Use Classes Order 1987 as amended, or in any provision equivalent to that class in any statutory instrument revoking or reenacting that order with or without modification. The recommendation is as set out on the update sheet and includes the amendments to conditions 1 and 3 and additional condition 18. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now come to public speaking. We have 2 opponents speaking who will share the 4 minutes, Mr. Cliff Watts and Mr. Stenning. I believe that you've been briefed on the rules. It's a 4-minute meeting, so 4 minutes period, so you have however you split those 4 minutes up between you, and you'll get a warning light at 30 seconds before, and at the 4-minute point I will ask you to conclude if you haven't already done so. So we look forward to hearing your comments.
Right, I'm Brian Stenning and I am a resident of Beech Tree Drive in Badshot-Lee. Point 1, the proposed entrance and exit at the western end of the site, as you've seen, clashes with the garden centre entrance and Badshot Farm Lane, both of which have articulated lorry, van and car traffic already. Development traffic would have to travel across both these entrances, not an ideal situation. The proposed development, as far as I can see, offers no meaningful extra facilities for Badshot-Lee Village. Again, not ideal, and the current facilities in the village are at best minimal. If approved, this development will mean the size of Badshot-Lee Village will have been increased by approximately 30% over the past 12 months. Loss of privacy. The nearest new dwelling will be less than twice the length of my rear garden from the back wall of our house at number 5. That's approximately 33 metres. This effect would also affect numbers 1 to 12 Beech Tree Drive in a similar fashion. For some houses in Beech Tree Drive, notably those nearer the main Badshot-Lee Road, this development would mean roads on three sides of some houses. Equally, the animal sanctuary would be driven out from their current location were this application to be approved. And I note the proposed housing density seems to be pretty near the maximum allowed, but in my opinion it's not ideal for a village location. That's me finished.
Good evening, I'm Cliff Watts. I represent Badshot-Lee Community Association. We, Badshot-Lee Community Association, oppose the development of this site as it would be a loss of more of our green fields. However, we do accept that the site is put forward in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan and the local plan and was seen as a less contentious area in our 2013 village survey if our village had to grow. We have worked with the applicant who has listened to our ideas and reduced the housing density and provided some parking for the recreation ground. The dual access is a good idea, but it not be at the expense of any existing on-street parking on Badshot-Lee Road. Generous parking is needed on the site to avoid adding to the existing parking problems in the village. Minimum standards of parking and overlooking of existing properties are not good enough. This application, coupled with the adjacent site already recommended for 71 homes, will enlarge our village by 30%, and we are still awaiting the outcome of another 140 houses currently with the Secretary of State. If this application is recommended, we ask the committee to make a condition that the applicant continues to work with the community over the reserved matters. The MPPF has 12 core principles. The first states that development should be plan-led. We now have a local plan and a neighbourhood plan supporting this application. They do not support any others in Badshot-Lee. If this application is recommended, we would not expect any other speculative developments around Badshot-Lee to be supported by the council. We have provided our share of new housing for this planning period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watts. Perfect timing. Thank you. And we now move on to the supporter, Mr. Norman Gillen.
Good evening. Thanks to the committee for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicants, who have come together as adjoining local landowners to promote this application site, hereby addressing some of the issues previously raised on an application on the site and an appeal. The committee will be aware of the current issues with the lack of housing in the area, the ongoing delays in the local plan, and the number of planning applications being submitted across the borough, some of which will end up at appeal. The Farnham Neighbourhood Plan consultation period closes next Monday. Approving this application in outline, with all matters reserved, is in effect an endorsement of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, a plan now to be afforded weight in the planning application assessment as set out in the Officer's Report. We endorse the Officer's Report and its contents, and it is a thorough examination and assessment of all the considerations associated with this application. Bearing in mind the housing numbers required across the borough, greenfield development is coming around Farnham. Approving this application is a way to ensure that such development is directed to both a sustainable location and a location identified by the community itself as to where they would like to see housing if housing is required. And as we know, it is. That an additional 80 dwellings will bring impacts is not disputed, especially when combined with development nearby. However, the impacts of this development have been assessed and discussed with statutory consultees, for example English Nature, Surrey County Council, Surrey Wildlife Trust, amongst others. The Officer's Report considers all of these discussions and the reports that were submitted. Additional work was required in terms of transport modelling for the single access on St George's Road, as well as a landscape and visual impact assessment for the AONB and some wildlife studies relating to newts across the road in Badshot Road. In addition, the impacts of the development in this area have been extensively assessed as both part of the neighbourhood plan formulation and also as the evidence base for the emerging local plan, for example a landscape review and the Greenbelt Review. Farnham Town Council and the Community Association have worked tirelessly to ensure that, if development is coming, it goes to the best place for the local community. This additional work and the information submitted with the application address all the concerns raised during the previous applications and the appeal on part of the site. The current development plan is, in NPPF terms, out of date, and so until the adoption of the new plan with the new policies, the proposed development needs to be primarily assessed against the NPPF. It's noted that the Borough Council have amended their methodology in calculating 5-year housing land supply, and we have some concerns over this methodology. However, these concerns are for another day. Bearing in mind the housing numbers required, unless living under a rock, everyone in the borough is well aware of the housing pressure the area is under, both for market and affordable housing. This scheme delivers both. However, emerging policy is now beginning to get to grips with this pressure. Farnham Town Council have worked hard to get the neighbourhood plan to where it is now, Regulation 16 consultation, with the application site included as a housing site within that plan. And whilst the local plan is getting there, it still remains behind schedule. This has meant both a requirement for more housing as time has gone by, and also, positively for this application, the layer of statutory plans below it, the neighbourhood plan, has actually overtaken it, and so should now help shape it. All other things being equal, the application site should be allocated in the new local plan as a housing site. We would ask the committee to endorse this policy direction by approving this application now, rather than having the risk of leaving the allocation of housing in Waverley Borough Council to the Planning Inspectorate and compromising the delivery of the neighbourhood plan. In summary, this is an outline application with all matters reserved. The Borough Council maintain control of access, design and layout through reserved matters, the Town Council to an extent through their design guide, and Badshot Lee Community Association, who the applicants have worked with a lot during the course of this and would continue to do so as part of any subsequent application. We respectfully ask that the committee approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillen.
Thank you.
A few seconds over time, we will forgive you. Now, members, Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you are aware, this development is in my patch, and one of many applications in and around Badshot Lee, some of which we have rejected in the past and have gone to appeal. As was pointed out, we're still waiting for the results of some of those. Badshot Lee hasn't improved in terms of amenities since any of those previous applications. There's still no doctor's surgery, there's still no school places, and so on and so on. The crossroads is still just as bad as it always has been, and there are no local shops dealing with groceries and that sort of goods. Nearest one would be Sainsbury's or in Webburn Lane. So in principle I still am not happy with any suggestion of additional development in the ward, but I do accept that our own local plan and the neighbourhood plan are seeking to put housing into Badshot Lee, and this is, of the available sites, the least bad, so I won't object too strongly. I'm not sure that the retail use facility, what it's doing, and I'm concerned that it might attract additional traffic in the access road, and we've made comments in the past about whether or not Surrey Highways is right in assuming that the access from St George's Road along that piece is actually safe. They say it is, so we have to accept that, but I'm not happy with the idea of additional traffic there. And certainly I'm very pleased to hear that Highways have ruled out that access at the western end. Otherwise this road would be an immediate rat run linking St George's Road and Badshot Lee Road, and as Low Lane is in the opposite direction. So in general, Mr Chairman, I'm not happy, but I think we're probably going to have to accept it.
Branch. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just correct a perception? The neighbourhood plan will be on the same level as the local plan. It isn't one tier down. It's on exactly the same level when it's made as the local plan. I agree with everything that's been said. I agree with the speakers, and I agree with Councillor Story. None of us wants to start from here, and it's as simple as that. Tonight we're just looking at a square piece of land because all matters are reserved, but I think it's important that we put down some markers very, very clearly. Councillor Story has already raised the western entrance, which would just be appalling, and we certainly don't want a rat run readily built in to make the life of the residents miserable. But I think we always seem to me at these reserved matter stage, I know we're at the outline here, that we don't start with the most important people, which are the existing residents. I would always ask when this comes back at reserved matter stage that we start with them and work out how we can best fit the 80 homes without damaging the amenity of the existing residents. We seem to start in the middle and work out and hit them with whatever lands on the boundary, and I don't think that's good design. Anything that goes in Badshot Lee, it has to provide benefits for the village. It has to. Badshot Lee has been so exemplary in their attitude towards taking some housing through the neighbourhood plan process, but they have to have some benefits as a result. I am completely baffled by the commercial unit on this site, completely and utterly baffled by it, don't understand it at all, but if the residents wish a community building, then it has to be what the residents need and wish to see. At the moment, I just don't understand that at all. I think it's going to be quite ugly in the middle there and create all sorts of issues. But as I say, that's up for the residents at reserved matters stage. One of the speakers mentioned the parking, and this is something that really, at the next stage, we have to put a marker down now. Badshot Lee's parking is appalling. There just isn't any. And you can't improve it greatly because the cottages were built without means of putting the car off the road. So there's automatically a spill onto some parts of the road. When you're building in a site like this, there has to be parking and some. You cannot squeeze people in. You cannot put little car parks in areas. You have got to provide parking for the year that we're living in, a year when people have 2 cars, 3 cars. You cannot pretend that by not putting in parking, somehow the cars will disappear. And this is a very sensitive area. If you can't park on the site, there is no alternative. So parking has to be put in. It has to be really generous at reserved matter stage. I'm delighted that the applicant has stated publicly tonight that he will continue to work with the residents. this, as I say, we're just looking at a square box. Every single matter's reserved. It's quite bizarre not having even access to look at. So it's just whether the principle of putting up to 80 houses on this site is acceptable. And like Councillor Story, unwillingly, like the residents unwillingly, if it has to go somewhere, this probably could be a site that could take some housing. But it has to take the right housing. It's got to take into account the effect on the immediate neighbours. It's got to have masses of parking, and it has got to be ultimately something that delivers improvements for the residents of Badshot Lee. It's got to be what they want, because they live there and they know what they're short of and what they need. So all the way through this process, I would urge everyone, and I think I said at the site visit this morning, it's got to be a three-way conversation. It's got to be the officers, it's got to be the residents, and it's got to be the applicant, all working together, so that on these sites, wherever they are, we're looking at this one tonight, but whenever we have these greenfield sites on the outskirts of our settlements, we have to get them absolutely right. It's not good enough to put up mediocrity. We've got to get absolute, well, as close to perfection as human beings can get.
Thank you very much. Any other speaker? I'd like to make a comment just at this point, because Councillor Story and Councillor Coburn mentioned the lack of facilities. Could this commercial building, which I didn't consider on the site visit at all, be a retail unit which would serve them? It's probably too far from everywhere, but that is one point to be considered, I suppose, by the local residents. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I know Badshot Lee very well. I lived there for 20 years and I was their first councillor. So what Councillor Story has said about lack of amenities there, amenities in Badshot Lee have declined as opposed to improved. And one of the things we should be doing when we're looking at putting all these houses there is to in fact say, well, we have got to provide a post office or a doctor's surgery or whatever. And we don't seem to be doing that. I really do have some concerns about this, because this site has been under threat for many, many years, to my knowledge. I'm looking on page 11 at the 278 agreement with the County Highway Authority. And I do wonder how we dreamt up the figures here, because I know a little about pedestrian crossings and roads. £75,000 for a pedestrian crossing facility, environmental enhancement and capacity improvement at the junction is not going to go very far. And that really needs, what I'd hate to see is that we don't actually have enough money to carry out these things that it says on the 278 agreement. But we don't seem to be considering safety. And again, it says here, lighting on footpath 112. And I thought, wonderful. You know, it's very dark down there, and we've seen a picture of what the footpath looks like. And yet when you go to page 16, we're not going to get the lighting until the 30th house is occupied. Well, this is silly. You know, we need the lighting sooner rather than later, so that as people start to occupy these dwellings, there is safety. And in fact, if you go to the police and what they have to say, they have identified, and I've lost, oh, it's page 23, they have identified some areas where there is some concern. And I want to know what we're going to be doing about that. You're going to tell me it's a reserved matter. I want to somehow ensure, Chairman, that anything that we comment on tonight that is a reserved matter, that in fact it is not missed when it comes back. And we do know with some detail, for example, the new junction, I want to see the junction plans. I don't want to wait till there's a house built. I want to see the junction plans right at the start. And that, to me, I find very concerning if we're not going to do that. I noticed the rights of way officer is not very happy because some of the buildings are over the footpaths. Now, the footpaths then have to be moved. And if you read it, that's on page 24. So there are things here, and I think this whole issue of saying, here's a plot of land, agree it and we'll sort it out afterwards, really is totally unacceptable. I think we've got to have a bit more information so that we can actually say, yeah, the people are safe, this retail use, this seems to be a growing trend. I was sitting at a JPC not very long ago, and they were putting a retail business centre up in the middle of 100 houses. Why are we doing this? Is it something the government says we've got to do, so we're just doing it? I really don't know, and it really does concern me. It's a lovely village, Badshot-Lee. It has a great heart about it, and I loved living there. But we have got to protect the village and its people. I'm not against development, and I'm not against this development, but I want to be sure, like Councillor Coburn, that it marries up with what the people of the Badshot, and we consider the people. We want them on board. We want them to say, let's take ownership of this new development. We like it. Not ignore them. That to me is a kiss of death. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, as a councillor from the eastern end of the borough, I sympathise with the issue of not really wanting to be in this starting position, but recognising the reality we are where we are. The thing that people always talk to me about when they reluctantly accept there's going to be more housing development in their area is it's always subject to the appropriate infrastructure being in place. And so to build on the comments of Councillor Frost and Councillor Coburn, it does seem to me that if we have a draft local plan which suggests somewhat over 2,300 houses in due course are going to be, additional houses going to be built in the Farnham area, then every application which comes forward needs to be able to make a contribution, not just to the infrastructure within its own, with its own immediate impact, but makes a contribution to the totality of what is going to be required to enhance and develop the area as a whole. And I can't see from what is proposed here under the 278 agreements that that is what is happening. And it does seem to me, if this is to be a reserve matter, what we really do want to see when it comes back for the reserve matters, where the contribution is to these wider issues in the Farnham area. When we discuss the local planners members, we are always told that the individual planning applications have to be the route for funding the infrastructure. So, you know, where is it? And I, for one, you know, don't think it's adequate here. I mean, for example, there is limited here on green infrastructure. I mean, where are Waverley's additions to the sports facilities? I mean, I know there's a limited amount here for playing pitches and changing rooms and play areas, but what about our leisure centre and some of them, the bigger capital spends, which we inevitably will have to undertake if we're going to accommodate an increase in the population in the Farnham area? I would have thought we would need to see wider contribution in the infrastructure provisions. And this is just a general issue. When things come to us from outline permission, it does seem to me is the first opportunity to get the markers down for infrastructure contribution. I guess, again, as I say, not just for the individual application itself, but for their individual application's contribution to the wider plan in that area. So that would be my concern, and I'd be looking to understand where and when we might see that apportionment of that contribution, the wider contribution to infrastructure, becoming apparent. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Officers, would you like to comment with regard to the infrastructure contributions? It's a concern to all of us, I think, that we, at this stage, even though in reserve matters, we have actually said exactly how we were getting money and spending it, where that may not be how we feel as a council is the right way to do it, and there may be either further contributions or a redistribution of those contributions to achieve what we think is right. And the point that Councillor Band makes, of course, about clubbing together from all of the various largest applications is the right way to go, but I'm not clear that we're actually in a position to be able to do that. So either officers or indeed our our portfolio holder who might wish to answer the question for us. But officers first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps I could answer that question. Firstly, in relation to any individual application, you'll be aware as Planning Committee, you have to assess it on its merits. And of course, as an outline application, you need to be satisfied in principle that the application for up to the number that's been proposed, 80, can satisfactorily be accommodated on the site without prejudice or harm to certain matters, one of which is, in principle, its impact on infrastructure, which is why the heads of terms are proposed at this stage and that the 106 agreement is agreed at this stage. So you're quite right to ask that question at this stage, Councillor Band. Taking you back to page 11, we set out there, as part of the heads of terms, what the applicant has proposed in relation to this application with a view to seeking to mitigate its impact on the relevant infrastructure areas. And you're familiar with those types of matters. Clearly, there are regulations about how we request contributions. We just can't ask for a figure plucked out of the air, no matter how desirable it is to maximise that, given our needs generally. For any particular application, as you'll see later in the report, any contributions need to comply with the SIL regulations, that the contributions are related to the development, are necessary and are reasonable. And to vary from those legal requirements could mean either the applicant refuses to sign the 106 agreement or subsequently could come back and seek to vary it on the basis that the terms are either onerous, make the development unviable, or in fact are implicitly unreasonable. So there needs to be a balance in there. But clearly your concern is, as ever, that we are seeking the correct contributions to mitigate the impact of the development on infrastructure, but also taking your first point, Councillor Band, that are we also seeking sufficient contributions to contribute to the wider needs of the area, not just the site-specific harm created or impact created by this development. And these heads of terms do both. As you'll be aware, the main source of advice on these contributions is from our consultees, particularly in relation to transport. We seek the view of the County Highway Authority. And whilst it's not particularly clear from what's set out here, behind the scenes, both in Farnham and Cranley particularly, but in relation to Farnham here, the County Highway Authority have been forming their own agreement between them about the key areas that require prioritisation in terms of transport infrastructure in the area. So for Badshot-Lee, the areas that are picked out here are areas which are seen to be the most important areas to support in terms of mitigating transport in Badshot-Lee. The heads of terms for the education contributions will be in relation to specific projects that the Education Authority have identified that this development needs to contribute to, but they're part of a wider plan to develop the infrastructure needs in the area and broadening the discussion to what's happening with the local plan, which Councillor Adams, as the Chairman has invited, may want to comment further on. But of course the work going on in relation to the local plan is in the form of the infrastructure delivery plan, which is an emerging document where the related infrastructure for the growth of the local plan period is being put together and costed out and indicated in terms of its timing. Eventually that will become the equivalent of the SIL list, which when we get our SIL in place will be which we're securing contributions towards delivering. So the structure is there. It is a difficult area. It is probably the most sensitive area in relation to housing growth. But we're satisfied in particular to this application that we've got a robust set of requirements on the developer and that they're proportionate, they're reasonable and they're recommended by the statutory consultee. So I hope that's given you some comfort, Chairman, members, and perhaps Councillor Adams does want to say something further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I tend to agree with Councillor Band. I've also listened to the local councillors who say, you know, there's nothing for medical support, there's nothing for, I've forgotten what the other one was, but really basic infrastructure that is required in Bagshot-Lee. I mean, you have to take out from this 734,000 the contribution to the Thames Basin Heath avoidance strategy, because everybody who builds here knows that is something they have to deal with. So really you're left with the education, which Surrey has worked out obviously fairly carefully, and you'll take out the Thames Basin Heath. Really you're not left with a great deal that is actually of reasonable use to Bagshot Lee, or in fact even to this site. So I would like to see the developers and the owner get together again with the community and talk more seriously about the facilities that Bagshot Lee needs. I mean, there's this retail centre there which you're saying is perhaps not in the best location. Maybe there is another location in Bagshot Lee where that kind of facility would be better used, and you could then move some of the houses away from the built-up area over in the top left-hand corner of the picture, which would satisfy the residents of that, was it Beechcroft or something? Yeah. Move that road down a bit and, you know, give a bit more space there while keeping the same number of homes. But likewise, I certainly think that Bagshot Lee should have some medical facilities, if that's not there, especially with the other sites which are being put forward or being already given permission. So I would like the officers to consider that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Frost, you wish to come back?
Please. This junction where they're coming out by Bagshot Lee Garden Centre, this is the A324, which is a very narrow and very busy road. I'd like to see something, I mean, on page 10, a scheme to provide an uncontrolled pedestrian crossing. I think that should be a controlled crossing, not an uncontrolled crossing. That road is on a bend, and about 200 yards past Bagshot Lee Centre is a bridge, a very narrow railway bridge. It is very difficult to get two cars past each other. It's even worse when you get a heavy goods vehicle crossing over the bridge. So what are we doing about improving the bridge, widening the bridge, whatever? It's all of those sorts of things you need to consider in a location such as this. Okay, people can go to Sainsbury's and get their shopping if they want. There is medical facilities, but you can't walk there, you need a bus. And it's the other way, and it's on the border of Hampshire, and it's just over the border. So I really do think that when we look at some of these locations, we have to think much more carefully. There was a time in this council when we had what was called a planning forum. And that was when there were major applications coming up. And before the plans got approved, before they came before us officially, we met with the developers, with the community, and we sat here and we talked about the needs. So that the developers then went away and said, this is what the community needs, and this is what's going to make a sustainable development. And that's what we need, sustainable developments. Have we looked at the bus services? I doubt it. You know, they're not exactly one bus every 10 minutes. So it's things like that, and I think we're saying this because we're looking at a number of applications, although we're considering this one tonight, and we're becoming more and more aware that it's not just about building houses, it's about building communities. Thank you.
Officers, would you like to come back?
Just on that point, Chairman, before the point is lost, I think what's possible in the context of this application is that the applicant has proposed certain heads of terms. Some of those provisions have to be provided to make the development acceptable, but where there are areas of discretion around the payment of the monies, then I think it is within your gift to indicate that going forward, when we seek to conclude the legal agreement, you would prefer some of those discretionary contributions to be used for a different purpose. And that would be perfectly within our ability to have that negotiation. So if there are things that are currently proposed which aren't absolutely essential, and you would prefer the contributions, infrastructure contributions, to be directed to a different area, then we can take that away as part of the resolution as to go forward and talk to the developers about that. So that is possible. The other point I'd make is, Councillor Frost, you mentioned the development control forums. They are still available and we still offer them. And sometimes they're taken up. We haven't had one for a while, but it's for the developer to request that we hold them. We can't make them do that. I know they're a useful tool, but I just thought I'd confirm that they are still part of the pre-application package that's available. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mulliner first, and then Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. What Mr Sims has just said will raise a question I'll come to in a moment, but my only comment, having listened to everyone else, I'm not going to repeat them, is that while I understand why you would not want to have a permanent access onto Badshot Lee Road, the idea of a rat run is obviously highly undesirable. But I do worry about having only one access for this number of houses in case of some disaster preventing easy access for emergency services. And a point I'd ask officers to think about is whether some form of gate which the emergency services can access at the western end could be considered, so that people are not basically locked into that area if something goes wrong. And the second point, I wasn't quite clear from what Mrs Sims was saying, whether she's talking about basically moving the 734,000 around to do different things, but that figure is fixed, or whether she's talking about the figure not being fixed and we can actually ask for more if we think we have reasons to do so.
I think the former, Chairman. On the basis, obviously, this sum has been subject to negotiation, as I was saying at the beginning when I was speaking before. We have to be reasonable. We have to take into account that development needs to be viable, and this sum has been negotiated and agreed in principle by the applicants. I can't promise they will necessarily agree, but it's an aspect of negotiation that we could take away the fact that, for example, the contributions that are being made, for example, to play areas and playing pitches, the development already provides for its own play area on site. So that contribution is over and above that which it needs to provide in terms of the site specific, but it is a sum that our leisure services have indicated could be proportionate and reasonable for it to contribute to wider leisure facilities in the vicinity. If, however, there's a feeling that you'd like to request an alternative contribution to health facilities in the area, for us to explore with the health authorities what that could specifically be provided to, we could take that away as part of the resolution and take that preference on your behalf away from the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Band, you wish to come back.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. Well, I mean, I welcome the officer's offer to allow some flexibility as to how the 278 money could be actually distributed. But I still have grave reservations as to whether the quantum there is adequate. I mean, I understand the issue of viability of developments, but I also, we need to take into account that some developments may in fact may not be viable because of the requirements they place on infrastructure development. And I'm very concerned that we do make sure that every application, as it comes forward at this outline stage, because as I understand it, this is a one-shot go. We don't have the opportunity to come back at the reserve stage to seek more and additional infrastructure contributions, that we get it right at this particular point in time. Now, I'm talking as much as a matter of principle, and I acknowledge that this is not a particularly large application, a large number of houses in the overall scope of things. But we do need to set a principle that outline applications for housing developments in our areas will be required to take a share of the overall infrastructure contribution into account when coming forward. Because it's a fundamental issue I think for members in particular, to be able to demonstrate to the electorate that infrastructure is in fact being put in at the appropriate stage. And I think this is so important psychologically to get acceptance of what in many areas people find difficult to accept, what we're asking them to accept in terms of housing provision. That we must be really seen to be, go over the top, if you like, in demonstrating that we are actually meeting that obligation. So I have to say I still have reservations with this quantum of infrastructure provision is really adequate for this particular application, but I will bow to the advice from officers. But you understand the principle which I am trying to expound and make sure is embodied, always embodied at this particular stage.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, thank you. Just to say, totally understand that. As I said when I was speaking before, we really understand the importance that members place on infrastructure. But the system we have is well-oiled, and particularly so since a year and a half ago when the government changed the rules to ensure that no more than 5 obligations are put towards one infrastructure project while we still have Section 106 agreements. And we have a complicated but extremely well-used system whereby we get an application in, we consult the relevant bodies, we chase up the relevant bodies, and we request of them a statement as to what they can reasonably require of the development and to ensure that they're complying with the regulations, that no more than 5 obligations are going to one project. The project needs to be specific and it needs to be costed, and we need to be assured that the development would not be acceptable without it. So it passes a lot of rigorous tests, and each infrastructure provider, in order to inform that process, has to understand what is required generally in the area to accommodate the growth coming forward. So that process will be refined further, as I said, through the local plan, but it is in place and it is working as well as we can expect it to. And I think the corollary of that is to doubt the figures, which I can understand may well be the case, but it'd be very difficult to turn around and say that's not enough without any evidence that that is the case, because we have to go through a process to understand what the providers think is proportionate. We can only work on the back of their advice. If they're quoting more, so be it, but they're not. They're looking at it through this process and saying, for this development, this is the amount of money that we think is justifiable, because they always run the risk, of course, if they're asking too much, the developer will, as I say, refuse to sign the 106 agreement or consequently appeal against non-determination for it not being signed, and then say that the contributions were simply too high and would render the development either unviable or they didn't comply with the SIL regulations. So I hope that's given some comfort that there is a process in place. As I say, we are having to grapple with it with all these developments, and you'll see the same process coming before you every time you have one of these big sites. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coburn, you wish to come back.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just, I really want to reiterate what Councillor Band has just said, and in fact other people have sort of been nodding. We are asking developers, and you always tell us, to mitigate the harm that they in particular are doing with this development, but it is cumulative. In a place like Badshot-Lee, where everything is stretched at the moment, one additional house puts a stress on the local facilities. So, there may, as Councillor Bad said, there may come a point where these sites are not viable. But I don't really think we can compromise the lives of the existing residents just to get a figure that suits the developers for any particular development. I think Councillor Band is absolutely right. We have to say what we expect and why developers, I think Councillor Porosheski at one meeting said, it's not a gift being able to develop a greenfield site. There are pros and cons, there's rights and responsibilities. And we have existing problems, we have existing residents. I know we can't ask developers to put those right, but it's not good enough to say, well, this is all they could afford. It won't actually solve the problem, but it'll tinker a little bit. We have got absolutely now, we've had, 3 JPCs recently, and we have been really uncomfortable about what is going on on these sites. And it's all to do with the same things. It doesn't matter where we live. We're all concerned about our existing residents, the strain on the infrastructure, the fact that it's already creaking. And people don't understand the geography of Badshot-Lee. To access these services, they're going to go on the narrow roads. It's very easy to look on a Google map and think, oh, you can pop down there. No, you can't. It's not the way the roads work. And so, you know, it's about knowing the area. And yes, you go to your statutory consultees, but I tell you, the experts are very often sitting in the public gallery. They live there, they breathe it all day long. And I really do think that we have to get it right, as Councillor Bann says, because if we don't get it right now, we're not going to put it right at the next stage, and we're going to be very unhappy with what comes in at reserve matters stage.
Thank you very much. Lots of wise words been spoken. How we can actually apply them is the difficult part, I think. Any further speakers? Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. A lot of good points been made about infrastructure, and the only point I wish to make is that I think this discussion adds support to the point made by Mr. Watts in his objection statement, that bearing in mind that the fact that Bagshot-Lee will be increased by 30% by this development, this really should be the last development in Bagshot-Lee, and I think the discussion on infrastructure certainly adds to that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any further speakers before we go to the amended recommendation? Councillor Frost.
Sorry, Chairman, you're probably going to get fed up with me. We've been invited to actually say if we want to move around this money somewhere. And bearing in mind what Surrey Police are saying about the need for more security there, I think some of that money should be directed towards the parking and the fact there's no lighting and this sort of thing. It's very important that people are secure and feel secure and safe. And the lighting on footpath 112, as I said at a previous application, needs to be started when the development started. Because as soon as people move into the first house, they are going to use that footpath, and there's no lighting there.
Thank you very much. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened carefully to the arguments before, but mine's more of a basic query on the actual plan itself. I noticed this strip of land that divides the two properties up. We just have been told that one of the entrances is going to be closed, and from all appearances it looks as though it's going to appear a bottleneck if you only have the one entrance. There's some red section there that seems to be entering into the roadway itself. Could that present a problem as well when we're considering going forward? Are they going to seek a release of some of the land to improve the size of that road? Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, if I could just pick up the point on access. You'll have seen from the report and from the officer's presentation that the County Highway Authority have concluded that the single access is acceptable and safe, and that the western access cannot be made safe within the ownership of the applicant, and there's a third-party matter which can't be resolved. If it is your aspiration that when access is actually before you, because it's part of the reserved matters, that you wish the developer to more fully explore the alternative access, particularly for emergency purposes, I think there was a comment on that, then I think it would be within your gift to include an informative to say that's what you would like to do, and I recommend that you do that if you have that concern. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. On the problem of contributions, this medical facilities has come up a lot. And from previous experience, the local people, in consultation with obviously the local doctor, they said they needed more facilities. Surely that would be earmarked somewhere within the doctor's gift that they need a building in this area, and then contributions would go towards it from all the different applications and even, you know, one-off houses. But if that hasn't been put on the plate for the local people to even discuss, obviously the surgeries don't feel there is a need. Therefore, it's all very well saying that there needs to be medical facilities, But if the doctor surgeries don't require it, there's nothing that we can do about that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, it's a thorny problem, isn't it? There are a whole range of things which are not organisations which are not part of the consultation process in true sense. Broadband and infrastructure like that is not at the moment, and we haven't got any comments here about that, but of course it's an outline application and everything is reserved. So the points that Councillor Upton was making and others, there is nothing laid down with regard to the layout or anything else. It's just that the site can be developed and it could achieve the development sustaining 80 dwellings and this commercial stroke retail premises there. So we obviously can take that and enjoy it. The important one to me, and it seems to be from everybody else, is this point about whether we redistribute the finances so that we're able to achieve what we want to achieve. But of course I don't know that we've ever thought about putting money into a local health facility. It's they each of them, I believe, are individual businesses. Each of the doctor's surgeries are individual businesses who run their business as they see fit with the funding that they can achieve. And whether this application and the other ones that are going with it add sufficient numbers to make them understand that they can achieve improvements either through providing extra facilities elsewhere within the village or by improving the existing facilities they have, although I think some was it Councillor Frost said that they're actually over the border into Hampshire, but does that really matter in terms of a doctor's surgery? But it's been a good debate. I don't see any more hands up. Is there any amendments that we would wish to make? We've got what we have now need to go to is the update, the second update sheet that you have in front of you. It was read out to us by the officer, but you may wish to go through it again. That tightens up certain things. Is there anything else that we need to do something with? I can see Councillor Coburn's got some wonderful ideas.
No, not at all. It's just really a straightforward question. I don't want to commit us to something that I don't necessarily think is necessary. So we are looking at this, and it's totally outlined, all matters reserved. We've got this building, which I don't understand, and I still haven't had it clarified all day, this commercial use. We're now seeking to restrict it to very strict commercial uses in the strong. I mean, what flexibility do we have at reserve matters stage? Fine if this is what the residents want, then they can have what they like. I'm not arguing against it at all. I just don't understand it, and I don't want to commit ourselves to some enormous great commercial building which isn't necessary when we could be producing something that's better. So I'm a bit worried about that. I mean, what exactly are we committing ourselves to when we go for outline?
Chairman, thank you. Well, it really is just as it says, Councillor Coburn, that it is a building which could only be used going forward for those purposes. And we didn't actually read out, in fairness, what those uses are. But A1 are shops, A2 is a financial and professional service, A3 is a restaurant and cafe, A4 is a drinking establishment, A5 is hot food takeaway, and B1 is business offices. So if you're not happy with those uses, you could seek to limit those. What's critical is the description of development, which is what is before you, which is a building to provide commercial stroke retail use. So if your preference is just for A1 shops and B1A office, you could limit it to that, if that is your preference. They have a place in communities, though, so maybe that is what, I don't know. But, I mean, if you limited it to what you feel is appropriate, for example, A1 shop and B1A office, if the developer subsequently or subsequent occupier wanted to vary that, of course, it's up to them to come back and ask your permission to do that. Can I take from that you'd like to take A2, 3, 4 out and 5?
Can we, and I'm sure Councillor Coleman's going to come back with her own definition of what should or shouldn't happen, and clearly you're not happy with the idea of a commercial building in any sense, perhaps, because we're not convinced what it's going to be used for, can we leave that one open to either development or the provision of further housing, perhaps, on the site, if that's not there?
Chairman, I think the problem is you've got to respond to the development that is before you. And it's an outline application for 80 dwellings and a building to provide commercial stroke retail use. As I understand it, the proposal is a response to the requirement for sustainable development, where arguably a mixture of uses is actually more sustainable than a single use. And there was some debate at the beginning about the fact that this is an area that doesn't have facilities, so it could be argued that having a small shop on a new estate is actually quite a good thing. I think one member mentioned it could be for a post office. That is an A1 use. So it depends on development viability, it depends on business interest in it, but the fact is the applicant has proposed this use, and it does meet the test of sustainable development. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a mixture of uses, providing they're not incompatible uses, which they wouldn't be. And so therefore I recommend you leave it in that form, restrict it to those uses you feel most comfortable with, and let the market run its course. Now, if going forward nobody wants to occupy it, they may come back and request it's converted to dwellings. But that would be my recommendation.
Councillor Coleman, you're desperate to jump the queue. Councillor Upton wanted to speak.
I'm so sorry, but this is precisely what I don't want to happen. I don't want a great big building with a whole load of parking. The only areas that are really scruffy in Farnham are some of the, well, no, it's not a slight exaggeration, but, where you've got the odd shop and sort of takeaway and parking. They are the areas, the unloved areas of Farnham. If you are putting something on a greenfield site, it has to be future-proof. And if we are going to put a building here, we know not what for, which, if it isn't used, they come in immediately and put flats or whatever else they're going to turn it into. I just don't... I don't think it's what's needed on that site. Now, if the residents tell me I'm wrong, then that's absolutely fine. But, I am not willing tonight to commit to this because I don't understand why it's there. I don't understand why, when you're building 80 houses, you have to put the facility. I think Badshot-Lee needs improved facilities for all the new residents and for the existing residents. But I don't see why, in the middle of what we hope is going to be an exemplary place for people to live, you stick a retail building. Presumably it'll have an ugly back, because most of these retail buildings have an ugly back. It'll have ugly parking, and who knows what it will be used for in the future. So I'm sorry, I can't really support it because I don't understand it, and I feel we could be building a slum.
Thank you very much. Councillor Upton, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have an observation to make. Does the planning allow for a medical centre for this building?
Thank you, Chairman. It doesn't actually, because the description they've given is retail or commercial use, and a medical centre.
So the new medical centres aren't retail or come under those headings?
They would come under community use.
But we've had a lot of discussion here today about the amenities, and it might be possible if we could include that. It would be a good inclusion. I think the residents would be most happy if we could allow that to be a medical building rather than a takeaway. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. The more I hear, it seems to me that Councillor Coburn has a powerful point. If we don't think that we know what this building, or whether a building should be there, and if there hasn't been consultation with local residents to find out what they want, and I thought the right thing to do is to reject this application at this stage, not saying never come back and darken our door again, but let's get this information so we know what we should be permitting.
Mrs. Sims, you wish to come.
Chairman, I just think I should respond to that I think that would be very difficult to sustain an argument against such a refusal on that ground. Unless you can find overt planning harm to the proposal for that commercial building on that site. So rather than say we don't know what it's going to be used for and we don't know whether the preference is locally to have it on there, Clearly, the process requires or allows for an applicant to put forward a proposal as planning authority assessing on its merits. The consultation on the application has taken place, but in planning terms, the applicant, I think, would argue, well, it is sustainable as a mixed use. The concerns about the scale and the precise nature of that, of course, is a reserved matter. And at layout stage, you would be able to, and scale, you'd be able to determine how high it is, what it looks like, the parking arrangements. All those matters you're concerned about are going to be consequences of it, of course, are reserved matters. So I would guard against refusing it on the basis of not being sure it's needed there, rather than I would be minded to accept the principle and then take comfort in the fact that the detail will be agreed at reserved matters stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Brand.
That's interesting, but I mean, in the report, it says that this site would have a floor space of 225 square metres. So presumably that's not a reserved matter. You know, I mean, if we come to reserve matters, we can have some discussion about the size of the building. But once you've got a 225 square metres earmarked, am I wrong in this situation? We're stuck with it. You know, we may be able to deal with the shape and the design of it.
Thank you, Chairman. The size is indicative, and that detail is taken from the indicative plan, so you wouldn't be committed to that size. If you felt something bigger or even that size could not be appropriately accommodated on the site without creating planning harm, it would be in your gift to resist it.
Or smaller?
Or smaller.
We've got up to 80 dwellings, so presumably up to a certain size of building would be an acceptable point to be able to negotiate if we thought it was wrong. One of the points I'd like to come in at this point, and I've looked to Councillor Adams, I know that he and the chairman, who's away at the moment, have discussed ways of improving consultation between local members and the officers, etc., about development. Is there anything there that we can learn? There's clearly lots of things that have been said as to what we can achieve within the framework that we have and how we run our planning system to do this. And this would seem to be perhaps a good one to start with in terms of achieving something. I don't know whether you wish to comment on that, Councillor Adams.
I think we're trying to improve the communications all the time. We've just been looking at different ways of or making sure that people have more advanced information about JPC statements. I mean, what I've taken away tonight is that actually the information available about these these contributions is not comprehensive enough. We need to know what has been considered, what has been rejected, why these particular figures have are arrived at, and what other figures have been considered. You know, why is it not 150,000 more, for instance? Because that would be additional facilities that could be provided. We have to listen to the officers say, well, this is what's been negotiated. Well, that's fine, but how have they arrived at this negotiation? It doesn't actually tell us that at all.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor MacLeod.
Could I ask a question, Chairman? If we approve this application, is this building absolutely set in stone, or is it open to the applicant, having heard all the concerns from Councillor Coburn and others, to actually vary what he puts forward at the reserved matters stage and perhaps produce a building that would be more acceptable to everybody? Is that what, if we approve this, are we stuck with our retail building and that is it, and that can't be varied by anybody, including the applicant?
Sorry, Louise, you wish to come down?
Yeah, thank you. It would always be up to the applicant to come back, and they could either vary this application if it is approved, or they could come in with a full application for a different scheme, having responded to your comments and the comments of the community.
Does that answer your question? I think that answers the question. I mean, we already ascertained that we could the applicant could, with consultation, come back with a smaller premises if that was in, or a different use. But we've specified at the moment, or clarified, the uses that are there, and we're not happy with those clarifications anyway, because that could be a noisy pub in the middle of a very small residential area, or a number of different types of restaurants or takeaways or whatever. It could be broken up into a range of different things with that size, and that clearly, from what I've seen elsewhere, that was what happened years ago. It's no longer seen to be either viable or acceptable, except within the centres of perhaps small villages where there are. I mean, certainly in Bramley we have a range of different facilities there, and they seem to work together. But this is a totally different situation on a relatively small housing estate. Well, where do we go from here, colleagues? We have a recommendation on the sheet. Do we want to vote on that and either accept or reject that application?
Do they want to add informative? There was talk about adding informative about emergency access at the western side.
Yes, as I'm being reminded, do we want to add any informatives or whatever? Councillor Mulliner, you have some suggestions.
Yes, just picking up the hint from Mr Sims, which from the comment I made earlier, if we want to ask that the issue of emergency access from Badshot Lee Road be considered, then I believe that should be an informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to take some of these uses out. I mean, I'd like now to say no to some of these uses. I just think it's wholly unacceptable. The whole point of putting the development where it is, you've got the kiln, the village hall. You know, the idea was to create a nice village, to improve as much as you can with new housing and to have benefits, and to stick something totally antisocial would just be unacceptable. So I know, I hear what Louise said about reserved matter stage, but we've been here before and been told that we couldn't at reserved matter stage change some of the things we wanted to. So please, can we take out the antisocial uses if we are going to put any restrictions in? Because if we write it down on a piece of paper, it'll be used against us in the future.
So, Chairman, I recommend A1 and B1A, which is shop and office. That helps. Thank you, Chairman.
You say those two again. I didn't hear you properly.
A1, which is retail shop, and B1, subsection A, which is an office, a small office suite. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments on that before we go further? Officers, can I ask, I mean, this update sheet was there. Why did we include those various use classes in it? Was because we were prompted to do so, or because that we thought that in retrospect it was the right way to go?
I think, Chairman, to protect the council's position, it is right to have some form of restriction going forward. You could leave it to reserved matter stage if you prefer, but it is probably advisable to send the message back to the developer that if you are permitting a building at this stage in principle, as to the notion of what restriction you would wish to have on it, and then the condition then carries forward, of course, to cover the reserved matters. So it was a tightening up, really, of the position as recommended in the update sheet. But it's up to you as to whether or not you put the condition on at all. Thank you.
So thank you for that advice. Councillor Band.
I think I want to be clear how we're going to deal with the issue of the flexibility in the possibility of redistributing some of the 278 infrastructure contributions. I think we need to be clear about how we're able to do that at the reserved matter stage.
Thank you, Chairman. You would be doing it now because the 106 agreement will be concluded now in relation to the outline. What I'd recommend is, if it is particularly medical facilities you'd like to consider some contribution being made to, that as part of the resolution where you've got your list of various infrastructure heads that you include and medical facilities as appropriate. And that would allow us to go forward and further negotiate with the applicants in respect to the 106 agreement that they make an appropriate contribution to medical facilities. But we would need, critically, the support of the health authorities on that to say this is reasonable and this is what it would be spent on. So that would be an insertion into the resolution to say to include medical facilities as appropriate. Thank you, Chairman.
That's bad.
But we've heard other issues as well, like improvements to the proposals for the road pedestrian crossing. We've heard issues about lighting and safety. I mean, have we the flexibility? How do we generate the flexibility to look at enhancing those at the same time? I mean, when you're asking us to actually identify specifically tonight, you know, the changes. I was hoping we were going to have some flexibility later on to justify the changes at the reserve stage, you know, within the overall quantum. I mean, I think without the background information, it's extremely difficult, I think, at this stage, for us to make specific proposals without knowing what has been discussed, as Councillor Adams has mentioned earlier.
Chairman, I think when you're considering the layout and the other reserve matters, and if they give rise to a specific concern which isn't already captured by these heads of terms, which will then be part of the outline agreement, if coming out of the reserve matters it would appear that a different contribution or a changed contribution is required, or even an enhanced contribution, but it has to be justified, but because of what's coming out of the particular detail, then that would be possible. We would require the applicant to seek to enter into a variation of the 106 agreement on that basis.
I understand that in due course we'll have to be specific, but I don't think we can be so specific tonight. I mean, what I'm saying is I think come to reserve matters, I understand everything, which any change would have to be justified, and we would then be specific at that point. But at least we probably have the information on which to make that decision. What we're trying to do here is preserve flexibility and not actually create in these individual headings locked in stone so we can't shift them at some stage within the overall quantum.
I think that's what you actually said we're able to do, which is fine. So we need do we need a proposal and a seconder for anything that is there?
Can we just hold for 1 minute for me to get this, write this down? I want to write down the proposal. Second, can you ask if we could just hold for 1 minute? Can we just hold for 1 minute?
You want to stop now?
Yeah, just for 1 minute.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I'll start.
Listeners, Councillor Bannon, would you like to
Well,
say?
I'm happy to propose that. You know, the wordings I'm sure the officers will advise us on, but I'm happy to propose, you know, an addition to the recommendation on that principle, and I'm sure I can find hopefully somebody to second it.
Councillor Coburn is a seconder.
Chairman, sorry, can I just be absolutely clear? Are you looking for an additional insertion into this resolution to include medical facilities at this stage?
No. I'm
Fine.
looking for the flexibility to come back in due course with the evidence, if that is what we can find. But there may be other things, like enhanced pedestrian crossings, like all sorts of other things have been mentioned. But we do need, I appreciate, to get the specifics. I'm trying to avoid the specifics at this stage, just retain general flexibility within the overall quantum.
In which case, Chairman, you don't need to make any change at this stage, because that exists as an opportunity to you at reserve matters. If the circumstances and the detail of the reserve matters application suggest that a change to the 106 is required, then that is obviously available to you as planning authority.
Then can I suggest as an informative, we suggest we will be, at the reserve matters, we'll be looking to review the distribution of the quantum of the
So I'd recommend an informative, Chairman, to pick that up to say that at reserve matters stage there may be a change needed to the Section 106 agreement to include the necessary and appropriate infrastructure contributions to cover the impact of the reserve matters. Thank you, Chair.
And we need a second informative or a change with regard to the emergency access that Councillor Mulliner is putting forward. Is that a condition or an informative?
We're happy to include that. So it would be an informative to say that. Just read that out, Louise.
In any future reserved matters or full planning application that comes forward on this site, the access and layout should ideally propose emergency vehicular access from the west of the site onto Badshotley Road.
Is that proposal agreed? Thank you.
Have we added that? Have we added the informative regarding emergency access?
Yes, we have.
Okay, removing classes
Yeah.
A2, 3, 4, blah, blah.
Yes. So have we agreed that the class one we discussed and we seem to be in agreement is to change the class uses down to A1 and B1, B1A?
Yeah.
Is that agreed? Fine. We've dealt with the emergency access, we've dealt with the infrastructure contributions and the flexibility that we wish to have there. So including those, and on the update sheet we have a recommendation with the changes that we placed there on the commercial building, added the informative on the change informatives, and the recommendation as written on there says that subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure appropriate contributions in respect to the Thames Basin's heath avoidance strategy towards off-site highway works. Well, we need to change the wording there to reflect the flexibility that we've asked for within, we wish to have within that, and all the other areas, including contribution to playing pitches and play areas, etc., and that consideration of any other additional representations received, permission be granted. Now, does that cover the ground as far as everybody's concerned? Are we satisfied that we're covering all the points that we wish to have flexibility on and change? And if so, can I have a show of hands on those who agree with that recommendation?
Are you pushing the recommendation?
Yes. Councillor James, yes, quickly.
But, Chairman, the actual recommendation read out there, is that absolutely correct? Because it does, as you said, but can we change the one to...
Just a minute.
Yeah. What I said was that that recommendation should change,
No.
but it had to be rewritten, including what we've agreed with regard to the changes of use.
Chairman, I think the recommendation stands, but the point is that at reserved matters, if you get a scheme which requires, justifiably in planning terms, a different distribution or different heads of terms of the legal agreement, it may require an amendment to the legal agreement to pick up those changes. And that picks up Councillor Band's point that you would be responding to the specifics of the detailed scheme. And that, in law, is the correct way to do it. That's what I would advise you to do. Thank you, Chairman.
So can I now have a show of hands on those who agree with the recommendation as adapted and read out?
That's unanimous. Unanimous.
As set out in the report, that if requirements of recommendation are not met, permission be refused for the reasons set out in the report. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Well, members, I think we're there. Thank you very much. Been a talk through time.